The setting was Paris, within the grand walls of the renowned Maison Dufresne, a culinary institution synonymous with tradition and excellence. It was a place where every dish told a story, but for Victor Dufresne, the youngest son of the family that owned it, those stories had become stifling. Victor stood nervously in the bustling kitchen, surrounded by chefs who moved with the precision of a symphony. Tonight's dinner was crucial, a gathering of the city's elite to celebrate another milestone for Maison Dufresne. Yet, despite the glamour, Victor felt like an outsider in his own family's legacy. His father, Philippe Dufresne, a towering figure in the culinary world, observed the kitchen from his usual corner, his presence imposing. Julien, Victor's older brother and the heir apparent to the restaurant, stood at his father's side, reviewing menus and barking orders. Julien was everything the family valued: disciplined, conservative, and unwaveringly loyal to tradition. Victor, on the other hand, had always been different. Where Julien saw rules, Victor saw opportunities for reinvention. While the family clung to tradition, Victor dreamed of experimenting with flavors and techniques that would breathe new life into their dishes. The tipping point came when Victor presented his own creation for the evening's menu. It was a dish that combined French techniques with global influences, a bold departure from the restaurant's signature style. The kitchen staff murmured with curiosity, but Julien's reaction was immediate and scathing. "What is this?" Julien demanded, holding the dish as if it were an insult. "This is not Maison Dufresne. This is a mockery." Victor's heart sank. It's a modern interpretation, something that could attract a younger audience, bring new energy to our menu. Philippe stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Victor, this restaurant has stood the test of time because we honor tradition. Your ideas might work elsewhere, but they don't belong here." The tension in the room was palpable. Victor clenched his fists, struggling to contain his frustration. "You talk about tradition, but what about growth? What about evolution? You can't expect to keep moving forward by staying in the same place." Julien scoffed. "Growth? Evolution? You mean turning our restaurant into a circus act? You don't understand what it takes to run a business like this." Philippe's expression hardened. Julien is right. If you can't respect the legacy of Maison Dufresne, then perhaps you don't belong here. The words hit Victor like a blow. He looked around the kitchen, at the chefs who avoided his gaze, at the walls adorned with awards and photographs celebrating the family's success. This was supposed to be his heritage, his future, but it felt more like a prison. "Fine," Victor said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "If there's no room for my vision here, I'll find a place where it belongs." He removed his apron, grabbed his knife set, his most treasured possessions, and walked out of the kitchen. The night air hit him like a slap, cold and biting, but it also felt liberating. He paused at the edge of the bustling Parisian street, taking one last look at the glowing sign of Maison Dufresne. "I'll prove them wrong," he thought, gripping his tools tightly. "I'll prove to them that there's more to cooking than tradition." With that silent promise, Victor disappeared into the night, ready to carve a new path for himself and his culinary dreams. Victor's departure from Maison Dufresne led him far from the glittering lights of Parisian haute cuisine. Wandering through the cobbled streets of the city, he stumbled upon a small, modest establishment tucked between bookshops and florists. The sign above the door read La Flamme Rouge, its letters worn and faded. Curiosity and hunger pulled him inside. The interior was unassuming, with mismatched chairs and tables that bore the marks of time. The air was filled with the scent of herbs and spices, a comforting contrast to the sterile perfection of Maison Dufresne. Behind the counter stood Margot, the young owner and head chef, her auburn hair tied back as she carefully garnished a plate. Victor hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Excuse me," he began, clutching his knife set. "I'm looking for work." Margot looked up, her brow furrowing. "We're not hiring," she said, her tone apologetic but firm. "Please," Victor insisted. "I'll do anything, prep work, cleaning. I just need a chance." Something in his voice caught Margot's attention. She studied him for a moment, noticing the determination in his eyes. "Fine," she said finally. "You can start as a kitchen assistant, but no promises beyond that." In the days that followed, Victor threw himself into the work. He chopped, diced, and cleaned with an intensity that caught the attention of the small kitchen staff. Margot watched him from a distance, curious about the newcomer's quiet efficiency. One evening, as the restaurant wound down, Victor couldn't resist suggesting an improvement to one of the dishes. "Have you considered adding a hint of citrus to balance the richness?" he asked cautiously. Margot raised an eyebrow. "And you're an expert now?" Victor smiled sheepishly. "Just a thought." To his surprise, Margot tried the suggestion the next day. The result was a dish that delighted the customers and earned their compliments. Encouraged, Victor began to offer more ideas, each one enhancing the menu's appeal. Over time, Victor's contributions transformed La Flamme Rouge. The restaurant, once overlooked, began attracting a loyal following. Word spread about the daring new flavors coming from its humble kitchen, and Margot, recognizing Victor's talent, promoted him to head chef. But as the restaurant flourished, Victor kept his past a secret. He became Victor Lemoyne, a chef with no ties to the illustrious Maison Dufresne. Despite the growing acclaim, he avoided the limelight, letting Margot take center stage. One evening, after a particularly busy service, Margot joined Victor at a small table near the kitchen. "You've been a mystery since the day you walked in here," she said, her tone light but probing. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" Victor hesitated, his mind racing. "Here and there," he said vaguely. "I picked up a lot along the way." Margot studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, wherever it was, I'm glad you ended up here." Victor smiled, though a part of him felt uneasy. He knew that one day, the truth about his past might come to light. But for now, he was content to build something new, far from the shadow of Maison Dufresne. That night, as he locked up the restaurant, Victor paused to look at the sign above the door. La Flamme Rouge glowed faintly in the moonlight, a beacon of hope for a chef seeking redemption. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of pride, not as a Dufresne, but as himself. La Flamme Rouge was no longer the quiet, unnoticed restaurant it had once been. Under Victor's leadership, the small establishment began to draw the attention of food critics and culinary enthusiasts alike. Word spread about the daring, innovative flavors that emerged from the humble kitchen. Customers who once frequented the luxurious Maison Dufresne found themselves intrigued by the boldness and authenticity of La Flamme Rouge. Margot was astonished at how quickly things were changing. Reviews praising the creativity of the restaurant appeared in major culinary magazines. Customers lined up outside the door, eager to experience the menu that had taken Paris by storm. Despite the growing success, Victor remained focused, channeling his passion into every dish that left the kitchen. But with success came complications. Victor's name began to circulate in culinary circles, his identity as Victor Lemoyne becoming synonymous with innovation. While this brought acclaim, it also drew unwanted attention from his past. One evening, as Victor and Margot were closing the restaurant, Margot leaned against the counter, a smile of disbelief on her face. "Can you believe it? We're fully booked for weeks. I never imagined this would happen." Victor wiped his hands on a towel, his expression thoughtful. "You built something special here, Margot. I'm just helping it shine." She tilted her head, studying him. "You always downplay your role. Without you, La Flamme Rouge wouldn't be where it is today." Victor offered a modest smile, but her words stirred something inside him. For the first time, he began to wonder if he could truly escape his past while building a new legacy. Meanwhile, at Maison Dufresne, the atmosphere was tense. The once thriving restaurant had begun to feel the effects of La Flamme Rouge's rise. Regular customers had drifted away, lured by the excitement and originality of the smaller competitor. Julien Dufresne, ever vigilant, began to investigate the mysterious chef behind their rival's success. Julien pored over articles and reviews, each one praising the revolutionary menu at La Flamme Rouge. His curiosity turned to suspicion as he noticed certain techniques and flavor profiles that seemed all too familiar. A growing unease settled over him as he considered the possibility. The breakthrough came when one of Julien's contacts within the culinary community mentioned the name Victor Lemoyne. The description of the chef, a man with striking creativity and relentless drive, matched his estranged brother. Julien's face darkened as he sat in his office, the realization sinking in. "So, it's you," he murmured to himself. Hiding in plain sight, he wasted no time in sharing the news with their father, Philippe Dufresne. The patriarch listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Julien finished, Philippe leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "If Victor is behind this," Philippe said slowly, "then he's become a threat to our legacy." Julien's jaw tightened. "I'll deal with him. He needs to understand that he can't tarnish the Dufresne name." Philippe nodded. "Do what you must." Victor remained unaware of the storm brewing around him. At La Flamme Rouge, he continued to create, relishing the freedom he had never known at Maison Dufresne. But deep down, he sensed that his past was catching up to him. Margot noticed his moments of quiet reflection, but she chose not to press him, respecting the unspoken boundaries of their partnership. As the days went on, Victor began to feel a growing tension in the air. He knew that his success had not gone unnoticed by the culinary world, but he hadn't anticipated that it would reignite old rivalries. The climax of this growing unease arrived one evening when Julien walked into La Flamme Rouge. The sight of his older brother, standing in the doorway, sent a jolt through Victor. Julien's presence was a reminder of everything he had tried to leave behind. Without preamble, Julien approached Victor, his expression cold. "We need to talk." Victor glanced at Margot, who looked on with concern, then back at Julien. "Not here," he said. "Follow me." The two brothers stepped outside into the cool night air, the bustling noise of Paris fading into the background. Julien wasted no time. "You've been busy," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "It seems you've built quite a name for yourself." Victor met his gaze calmly. "What do you want, Julien?" Julien stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "You've been a thorn in our side long enough. Come back to Maison Dufresne. Help us salvage what you've damaged." Victor's eyes narrowed. "I didn't damage anything. I'm just doing what I love." Julien's composure faltered for a moment. "You don't belong here, Victor. You belong with your family." Victor shook his head. "I belong where I can be true to myself. And that's here." As Julien stared at his brother, he realized that Victor was no longer the unsure, underestimated man he once knew. Victor had found his place, and he wasn't going to give it up. The tension in the air was palpable as Victor entered La Flamme Rouge early in the morning, the memory of Julien's visit the night before lingering in his mind. Margot was already there, prepping ingredients for the day, her movements calm yet purposeful. She glanced up as Victor walked in, her expression tinged with concern. "Are you going to tell me what happened last night?" she asked, setting down her knife. Victor hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Julien came. He knows where I am." Margot's eyes widened. "What does he want?" "He wants me to return to Maison Dufresne," Victor said with a bitter laugh, "to help salvage the reputation I've supposedly damaged." Margot frowned. "And what did you tell him?" Victor leaned against the counter, his expression hardening. "I told him no. I'm not going back there. Not to the traditions that stifled me. Not to a family that never valued what I had to offer." Margot nodded slowly, her respect for Victor deepening. "Then you did the right thing. This is your home now." Later that evening, the confrontation Julien had threatened finally materialized. Julien and their father, Philippe, arrived unannounced at La Flamme Rouge. The restaurant was nearly empty, with only a few customers finishing their meals. Margot stiffened as she recognized them, her instincts immediately going on high alert. Victor emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. His expression hardened as he saw his father and brother standing in the dining area. "What are you doing here?" Philippe stepped forward, his authoritative presence filling the room. "We need to talk, Victor." Privately, Victor glanced at Margot, who gave him a subtle nod. "Follow me," he said, leading them to the small office in the back of the restaurant. The office felt cramped with the three men inside. Victor crossed his arms, leaning against the desk as Philippe and Julien stood before him. "This has gone on long enough," Philippe began. "You've made your point. You've proven that you can cook, that you have talent. But this rivalry is hurting both of us." Victor scoffed. "This isn't a rivalry. I'm not trying to compete with you. I'm just doing what I love." Julien interjected, his voice sharp. "What you love has cost us customers, reputation, and profits. Do you know how many people have abandoned Maison Dufresne for this experiment of yours?" Victor's jaw tightened. If they left, it's because they were looking for something you couldn't offer. Philippe raised a hand, silencing Julien. "Victor, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to offer you a chance to come back. You belong with us, with your family. Together, we can restore Maison Dufresne to its former glory." Victor met his father's gaze, his voice steady but resolute. "I don't belong there, Father. Not anymore. I've found a place where I can be true to myself, where I can create without constraints. I won't sacrifice that freedom. Not for you, not for anyone." Philippe's expression darkened. "You're turning your back on your family. Do you realize what you're doing?" Victor straightened, his determination unshaken. "I'm choosing myself. For the first time, I'm choosing what makes me happy." The confrontation ended with Philippe and Julien leaving, their expressions a mix of anger and resignation. Margot found Victor sitting at one of the empty tables, staring into the distance. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Victor nodded slowly. "I knew this would happen eventually, but it still stings." Margot placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "They'll come around, and if they don't, that's their loss. You built something incredible here, Victor. Don't let them take that away from you." Victor smiled faintly, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Margot, for everything." As the evening wore on, Victor resolved to move forward with even more determination. He knew the battle wasn't over, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way, secure in the knowledge that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The announcement of the prestigious Paris Culinary Innovators Competition sent ripples through the culinary world. The event, known for highlighting groundbreaking chefs and restaurants, would feature both La Flamme Rouge and Maison Dufresne as participants. For Margot, it was a dream opportunity to solidify her restaurant's reputation. For Victor, it was a chance to confront his family publicly and prove that his approach to cooking had merit. The preparations at La Flamme Rouge were intense. The small kitchen buzzed with activity as Victor and Margot worked tirelessly to create dishes that encapsulated their philosophy, bold, innovative, and deeply personal. Despite the excitement, a shadow of tension loomed over Victor. He knew Julien and Philippe would stop at nothing to undermine him during the competition. The day of the competition arrived, and the grand hall of the Paris Culinary Institute was abuzz with energy. The room was filled with top critics, culinary icons, and influential figures in the food industry. Each restaurant was assigned a station where they would prepare their signature dishes for the judges and audience. Victor and Margot set up their station with precision, the menu showcasing a harmonious blend of traditional techniques and modern creativity. Across the room, Julien and Philippe commanded their team with the confidence of seasoned professionals. The tension between the two groups was palpable, even amid the hum of the crowd. As the competition began, Victor focused entirely on his craft. The dish he had chosen to present was a deeply personal one, a reinterpretation of a classic family recipe, infused with elements from his journey at La Flamme Rouge. It was a tribute to his growth and identity as a chef. Halfway through the event, Julien made his move. As Victor plated his dish, Julian approached the judge's table, his tone casual but his words cutting. "It's fascinating," he began, "how some chefs build their careers by rejecting tradition while still borrowing heavily from it." The comment was a thinly veiled jab at Victor, and the room shifted uncomfortably as eyes turned to him. Margot's expression darkened, but Victor held up a hand to stop her from responding. "You're right, Julian," Victor said calmly, turning to face his brother. "Tradition is a foundation, but it's not a cage. The beauty of cooking is that it evolves, just like we do. My dish isn't about rejecting our roots. It's about honoring them while embracing change." The crowd murmured in approval, and Julian's smug expression faltered. The exchange only fueled Victor's determination as he returned to his station, his movements precise and confident. When it was time to present to the judges, Victor stood before them with his dish, a refined take on a rustic family stew, reimagined with unexpected flavors and textures. As he explained the inspiration behind it, his voice carried the passion and vulnerability that defined his journey. "This dish represents who I am," Victor said. "It's a blend of where I come from and where I've chosen to go. It's about finding freedom within tradition and creating something that feels true to myself." The judges tasted in silence, their expressions shifting to ones of delight and admiration. The audience erupted in applause, and for the first time, Victor felt the weight of validation, not from his family, but from his own accomplishments. Margot beamed with pride as Victor returned to their station. "You were incredible," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "I couldn't have done it without you," Victor replied. "This is as much your victory as it is mine." Across the room, Philippe watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Julian, however, looked visibly shaken. The cracks in their unshakable confidence were beginning to show. As the event concluded, the judges announced the winners. La Flamme Rouge was declared the most innovative restaurant in Paris, its daring approach and heartfelt story captivating the panel. Victor and Margot stood together on the stage, accepting the award as the crowd cheered. For Victor, the victory was more than a trophy. It was proof that he could succeed on his own terms, without compromising his values or identity. And as he looked out at the audience, he saw not only validation, but the promise of a future he had built with his own hands. The aftermath of the competition left a lasting impression on the culinary world. La Flamme Rouge was now firmly established as one of Paris's most innovative restaurants. Victor and Margot received invitations to collaborate with renowned chefs, their work celebrated as a refreshing evolution in French cuisine. Yet, amidst the accolades and opportunities, one unresolved matter lingered in Victor's mind: his family. A few days after the competition, Victor received an unexpected message from Julian. It was brief and to the point. "Meet us at the park near Rue Royale. We need to talk." Victor hesitated. The wounds of their past confrontations were still fresh, but something in the message compelled him to go. That evening, he arrived at the park, the cool breeze carrying the scent of freshly bloomed flowers. Under the dim light of a street lamp, he saw Julian and Philippe waiting. Julian was the first to speak. "Congratulations on your victory," he said, his tone devoid of the usual sarcasm. "You proved yourself." Victor crossed his arms, studying his brother. "Is that what you call me here for? To acknowledge something you never believed I could achieve?" Philippe stepped forward, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "We didn't handle things well, Victor. We didn't see your vision for what it was. And for that, we're sorry." The words hung in the air, their weight sinking into Victor's chest. He had spent years yearning for this moment, yet now that it was here, it felt strangely anticlimactic. "I don't need your apologies," Victor said finally. "What I needed was your support back then." Julian sighed. "We know, and we can't change the past. But we'd like to find a way forward." Victor remained silent, his emotions swirling. Finally, he looked at them both. "I'm not coming back to Maison Dufresne. What I've built with Margot at La Flamme Rouge is where I belong." Philippe nodded. We're not asking you to, but perhaps there's a way we can support each other, even if our paths are different. For the first time, Victor saw a glimmer of sincerity in his father's eyes. Maybe, he said cautiously, but it'll take time. Back at La Flamme Rouge, Margot greeted Victor with a knowing smile. How did it go? Victor shrugged, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Complicated, but I think it's a start. Margot handed him a glass of wine, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Well, while you were out making peace, I was looking at expansion plans. Victor raised an eyebrow. Expansion? She nodded. We've outgrown the space, and we have the momentum. I think it's time we think bigger. Victor chuckled. You never stop dreaming, do you? Margot grinned. And you wouldn't have it any other way. Months later, La Flamme Rouge reopened in a larger space, blending its signature warmth with a more modern, refined design. The restaurant continued to attract diners from all over the world, each dish telling the story of Victor's journey, his struggles, his triumphs, and his unyielding belief in the power of authenticity. Philippe and Julien, true to their word, became silent supporters, recommending La Flamme Rouge to their own clientele. While the relationship remained cautious, it was no longer defined by resentment. Victor's transformation wasn't just about culinary success. It was about reclaiming his identity and finding the courage to chart his own course. And as he stood in the bustling kitchen of La Flamme Rouge, surrounded by laughter and the aroma of creativity, he knew that this was only the beginning. His legacy would not be about rejection or rivalry, but about the relentless pursuit of passion and the power of forging one's own path.